Good evening, and welcome to another edition of Mental Health Mondays. We are here once again today on this Mental Health Mondays. We come to you from the Saving Grace Community Church in Lockland, Ohio. Tonight's broadcast is brought to you by Saving Grace Community Church and Grace House Cincinnati, a ministry and nonprofit agency of Saving Grace Community Church. Well, backed by popular demand tonight, we have as a special guest Dr. Quentin Moss, MD, President and the CEO of Modern Psychiatry. Thank you once again and welcome, Dr. Moss, for being with us tonight.
Hey, man, it's great to be here. Thanks again for the invitation. And hello, everybody.
Tonight, we are going to be talking about when problem children grow up. When problem children grow up. Most parents, when they are anticipating Dr. Moss having a child or a child being brought into this world, they have lofty ideas, they have big ideas, and they see their children not as being sources of problems, but sources of blessings and joy.
Yeah.
And as time goes on, sometimes it's soon to find out that that child that they anticipated having that would be kind of carefree and problem-free. For some parents, that child or children can be the source of a lot of pain, angst, and discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
And so tonight, as we look at the problem child and what happens when a problem child grows up, we anticipate that we'll be able to talk about, define what a problem child is and why it's so important to make interventions early on because children do grow up to become adults.
Mm-hmm.
And so many social scientists, many folks that are smarter than me, that are some of your colleagues in your profession, have come up with a definition for what is a problem child or what are problem children. And basically, the consensus opinion is, or consensus definition, is that a problem child is a child or children who are particularly difficult to raise or educate, especially due to, and I want to show that on the board, especially due to a lack of self-control and behavior that is disruptive and antisocial.
Yeah.
Problem children develop a reputation of being bad. And so, Dr. Moss, hearing that, certainly you are a parent, and certainly when you hear that, how accurate do you believe that definition of a problem child to be?
You know, I think that is an accurate definition, though I do have some issue with the label a little bit, though.
Okay, yeah.
You know, problem children. When I was growing up, bad children. You know, he's so bad. You know, that label for some of the kids continues to really to perpetuate some of the behaviors that they've had. You know, just like we can pronounce blessings on kids, we can pronounce curse on kids too. Yeah. So I, just to be an aside from what they describe, I would like to use the word challenging.
All right.
Challenging child. You know what I mean?
Right.
The child's going to push you to the limits, make you pull your hair out. That's a challenging child. And so we like to see, you know, perhaps this definition across a couple of domains. You talked about scholastic performance, the ability to perform in school. Mm-hmm. You know, how do they, you know, adjust, or how do they render themselves to authority? Mm-hmm. How do they render themselves to the parents, to school officials? And how they get along with their siblings and other peers. Mm-hmm. And then other behavioral things to think about too are, you know, sleep and eating patterns. So I will probably bring all of those things into, you know, looking at this challenging child, you know, that we're talking about tonight. You can continue to say problem child, I know, because that's what you got to reference for tonight.
Right.
Think of it as a challenging child. And another reason I want to use that word is, we believe that, all of us have some redemptive ability, some
Yeah.
redemptive potential.
Yes.
And what we see with some challenging children may be in great contrast to what they may become as adults.
And something you said earlier is right. Words are powerful.
Yeah.
And if you are constantly and continually told that you're a problem, that you're a burden, or in some instances, you're just like your father, you're just like your mother.
Oh yeah.
Again, the self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will. I think the scripture says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And so it has been said, and rightly so, we are what we eat. And it can be said that we are the way we think of ourselves. And certainly that comes into play. And you touched on a few things that were critical and a great segue along what you were identifying as challenging kids or problem children. Some things through characteristics have been identified. One is defiance. A child who you ask them to do something will just say, no, I'm not going to do it. And oftentimes they're considered a challenge, or they are considered to be a problem child. Now, the interesting thing is I was just today at the store, and there was a young lady little girl, about 4 or 5, she was with her grandparents. And there was a crosswalk in front of the store. And she didn't want to hold her grandparents' hand, and she wanted to go out into the traffic of the parking lot. And then the grandmother was kind of talking to her. It's okay, you don't have to go. And the grandfather said, "You're going to hold my hand," and she said, "No." So now, in my culture, in my world back in the day, well, anytime you were defiant, it was met with swift, action. And so the grandfather, who had to be old school, he said, "I don't care what you say, you're gonna grab my hand." And he grabbed her hand and brought her across the street.
Right.
So defiance, as we look at that, how much of a child being defiant is normal, and what should we be concerned when children become defiant and don't want to do what's requested of them?
From below the age of 2, children are trying to find their sense of autonomy, right? Yeah. They're trying to fulfill these drives that they have within them. And as we get into adolescence, it kind of peaks where, folks are seeking emancipation, not necessarily formal emancipation, but they want to be their own persons. So I think that we need to be, to watch that. But one of the things that I would like to caution is this. When we have a child that's being defiant or that's being resistant to the rule that's being placed upon them, we have to make sure that our response is really proportionate to the situation. So in that situation where the kid is, crossing the street and there's a great deal of danger, grabbing the child's arm to make sure they can be safe, that would be appropriate, right?
Right.
But if there is a much smaller battle that we're waging in regards to the defiance with the child, we have to make sure that we're not bringing World War III arsenal to something that's a bit of a skirmish.
Right.
And so I would just be mindful of how we monitor that defiance. But consistent defiance across a number of domains, when we've tried to give the child appropriate choices, right? So they can kind of save face with the safe choice that we're trying to give them, and we can't, and there's no area for negotiation. As we look at that and other patterns, we also need to look at one, as a parent, what am I demonstrating or presenting to my child?
Right.
Child at that age will listen to what we're saying. But the brain is geared more so to watch what we're doing and to mimic what we're doing. So if we are people that demonstrate poor boundaries or lack of response to authority that's over us, if we demonstrate that, then we are mirroring, what the child is actually going to do in their behaviors.
It's kind of like a student in a child in class who is corrected by the teacher. And the parent, instead of trying to understand, classroom management, what all of that is about, tells the child, you don't have to take that from that teacher.
Yeah.
Next time that teacher tells you that, you tell them this, that your father, your mother's going to come up and talk to them and let them know, who's boss. And so certainly to your point, children are impressionable. They are sponges. And oftentimes parents will say, well, I wonder where they learn that from.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
the quick answer is take 2 steps to your left, look at the mirror over the vanity, and then you'll understand.
Right.
You'll understand who's responsible for the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
Another identifier as a person being challenged or a problem child deals with food. A child does not eat the appropriate amount of food, sneaks, gets food, is not eating at the right time or inappropriate time. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts of that with all of the disorders that are related to food? What else might that behavior um, uh, be reflective of?
We see children who have struggles with certain types of integration conditions or certain forms of autism on the spectrum, where, eating creates a number of challenges, not only because of the ritual that's around eating, but even the texture and the taste of the food, sensory, they're challenged in that way. So that's one thing. But as we think about people who have eating disorders, this issue of food becomes yet another battleground, becomes another battleground of self-efficacy and autonomy, becomes a power dynamic with the parent. So, when we see people, having these children having these challenges with food, we know we have to explore those things.
Mm-hmm.
But as a culture, we've also gone in a direction where we're less structured around our meals.
Right.
There's rarely a time where most families really sit down and eat together.
So so the whole cavalier attitude, the not having eating at a certain time, where you
Yes.
sit down and pass me this, hand me that,
Yes.
plays in to a child not understanding there are boundaries when it comes to eating.
Yeah, and so when we're able to eat in a structured way,
Mm-hmm.
then we'll ritualize this in a safe way. But then we'll also show that we don't eat to cope. We don't eat when we're stressed,
Mm-hmm.
because we have this structured way in which we partake of this meal and all the discussions that come alongside of that.
Mm-hmm.
But when we have continued difficulty with eating, such that it's causing nutritional issues,
Mm-hmm.
significant weight changes, much like what we see across the domains with defiance,
Mm-hmm.
we need to take the initiative, even before the school says so, to try to have our child evaluated. And that is a huge hurdle for our community, to take our kids somewhere to be evaluated by a psychologist, therapist, or a doctor. But that may be, a life-altering intervention for someone really being able to meet their full potential, as opposed to having a child who has all these symptoms, struggles to cope, and then goes into adulthood, continue to have these challenges that were never addressed.
Yeah, and that's a critical thing, because we should not, as parents, the parents should not leave it up to the school to notice when something does not seem to be normal going on in our child's life.
Mm-hmm.
But also there is a responsibility for us parents who are future parents, or parents who are about to become people who are about to become parents, to educate themselves. I often think that if a person who has to drive needs to go to driving school and get a license, I think that there should be a school or some training, and that a license should be required for parents to become parents, because we leave so much, Dr. Moss, up to other people, instead of taking the responsibility of ourselves to say, this is the precious gift God has given me. and I need to make sure that I'm managing. So another thing is disrespectful. Well, you go ahead, Dr. Moss.
Well, I'm just gonna add to that. You know, when I speak to a lot of child psychologists and psychiatrists as we try to treat children,
Mhm.
and you know, the greatest challenge and barrier is not necessarily being able to help that child. That's not
Mhm.
necessarily the greatest challenge. The
Mhm.
greatest challenge is helping the parent to see what type of symptoms they have,
Hmm.
their behaviors and their parenting styles,
Yeah.
and how that's creating bad outcome for
Wow.
that particular child.
Wow. Wow. And that may not be pleasant all the time.
Oh no, no.
Well, another thing that is listed or as identified as a person being challenged, in your words, and a problem child is being disrespectful behavior and impulsive. We know that children, for a myriad of reasons, um, will call people names, so forth and so on, and will mock and make fun of people, and are disrespectful. And sometimes uh, some parents believe that's cute. That's kind of humorous. When a
Right.
child says a curse word, when a child moves their body like an adult moves their body who's dancing um, in a provocative way. Um, Sometimes we seem to be caught up and enamored in, the fact that we got a little thug on the way or someone who is well versed in the world, and who calls people out of their name for some reason. That's attractive. But also impulsive behavior. Young children, you know, um, uh, it's not unusual, social scientists say, for a 4-year-old to hit somebody, to do something, to make unkind statements, or to belittle people.
Hmm.
That's not something. But again, to what you said earlier, that if that type of behavior um, is seen in their parents, and their parents model that, then a parent probably should not be surprised to get a call from school.
You know, I would agree with that. You know, we live in a culture where it's fun and funny to see that, and whether it's on YouTube or Facebook posts, and
Mhm.
folks, you know, acting like that, and you know, we share it with each other, and you know, our kids also get exposed to that. And
Mhm.
as you mentioned, when they do it, we do a parenting style that we don't realize that we're doing. We're providing positive reinforcement for that behavior.
Right, right.
And positive reinforcement goes such a long way with children. Now, we don't want to shame the child for doing that, but
Mhm.
that is an opportunity to instruct the child.
Yes.
But you spoke about, you know, impulsivity. Kids are impulsive, you
Mhm.
know, to just get up and run and jump up a tree and jump
Right,
over. I mean,
right.
kids are terribly impulsive. And of course, they often don't think about consequences. So that's mostly the nature of being a child. But when it creates significant dangers for them, we
Mhm.
see that they're disruptive in settings, disruptive in the home. And, you know, it gives some concern. So you can take your child to be evaluated, but there are some things that we can do
Yeah,
to try to help the child perhaps to be less impulsive. So one, what are we feeding them?
right.
How much sugar and caffeine are we giving the child? That creates a great deal of impulsivity. Do we
Mhm.
have a structured routine for the day? Does
Hmm.
the child know what time they're supposed to get up, what time they're supposed to go to bed?
Mhm.
After school, these are the activities that we're going to make sure are structured for them. Do we try to limit the amount of idle time for them?
Mhm.
You know, how do we help them with decision making? You
Mhm.
know, when they're able to make appropriate decisions in circumstances, do we give them then that positive reinforcement? So
Mhm.
they know that's the way I should make a decision
Right,
the next time.
right.
And then once we got these areas kind of reviewed, and we're still looking at issues with impulsivity, particularly in school and also at home.
Mhm.
Again, you know, trying to get the child evaluated to see if there are other behavioral things that we
Mhm.
can do at the home to cue the child to be able to monitor their behaviors. And then if those behavioral things don't work, you know, if it comes to it, there are medications if that patient has the appropriate diagnosis, which could help that child still be able to maintain themselves safely.
That was the point I was just about to make, because certainly not every child whose behavior is uh, who displays disruptive behavior can be attributed to the environment in which they grew up in. I think that in every family, there is perhaps one person, for whatever reason, in every class, there's this one person. And yes, I've got to say, in every church, there's, there's at least one person who
Right.
doesn't seem to be on the same page, who is exhibiting behavior that is disruptive and, frankly, annoying.
Hmm.
But one of the other things I want to lift up that is identifier of the person who's a challenge kid, a problem child, is aggression. And when they're upset, uh, throwing stuff, I've seen it. Being a guest teacher, a child is frustrated and not be able to grasp what's going on in the classroom and pushes their homework and says this is stupid. I don't want to be here. And the problem with aggression is that if that's not checked, it won't be the fact that they'll throw a book, against the wall. They may lift their foot to kick their sibling or kick you.
When we think about that level of defiance where kids are aggressive, I point to some of the things that I've said, make sure, structure and all of that. But, one of the challenges with kids in that setting is that there are a lot of highly intelligent children
Yeah.
who, for whatever reason, their minds go faster than sometimes most teachers can teach.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's a subject that the kid just has absolutely no interest in, but their mind is going a million miles per hour.
Mm-hmm.
And now that million miles per hour mind is confined within this particular topic,
Right.
in which they're frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to spend time with the child and see if we can understand that, for there are many highly intelligent kids who have been ushered out of school systems simply because we haven't been able to identify that as a challenge. And so they take that intelligence and they unfortunately use it in more negative ways now that we weren't able to channel that.
Would you say that disproportionately those type of diagnoses have been assigned to young African American males?
Yeah, I would say that when we think about conduct disorder, where people are accused of bullying, threatening, and all of those behaviors, they're often assigned to African Americans. We have a long history, in mental health. Not that I want to deter people from seeking treatment, but sometimes we don't always get it right because of our biases of race. So that does play a part. However, the other side of that is that we want to be able to stop this pattern of the system ushering our kids into the legal system, as opposed to ushering them to be evaluated and treated.
Absolutely.
That for sure we want to encourage, to allow our kids to have the appropriate evaluation, hopefully the appropriate diagnosis if there is one, and the appropriate interventions, whether it's behavioral, family therapy, that parents getting coaching on how to parent, and then if necessary, if there's medications that are required.
That is a great segue into our next point, because as I said earlier on the onset, that challenged children or problem children do become adults.
Yeah.
And sometimes this behavior is not dealt with. It's seen as usual or just the way a person is. And some parents fail to see long term what the effects could be, or just what type of child um, their children will become in society, what type of adults they will become in society. And sometimes that long view is not in play. But to your point, oftentimes African American children are disproportionately placed in correctional facilities. And in fact, the Prison Policy Initiative in their research discovered that youth in general, that there are 48,000 youth in the United States who find themselves confined in facilities as a result of the Justice Center daily.
Mm.
And so, additionally, the National Institute of Justice reports that the continuity of offending from the juvenile into the adult years is higher for people who start offending at an early age, chronic delinquents and violent offenders. And so studies have shown there is a correlation that the younger a person is involved in the system, the likelihood is that they will continue throughout their years and even into adulthood
Mm-hmm.
because of the problems that they had as a juveniles. They'll be incarcerated as adults.
Well, I think there are a number of reasons for that. One that I think about is this. Once you are involved in the legal system, particularly as an African American male, your paternal figure has been displaced. Your paternal figure is now the judge or the parole officer who now works with you.
Yes.
And they're going to come with the stick and the rod every time, as opposed to us having our, family figures from home, who should have the authority figure, much like that of our Father of God.
Yes.
Chastises when necessary, but who also loves, gives grace, and gives mercy. So
Yeah.
For one, their paternal, their view of what a father is, what authority is, that's been changed once they're involved in the legal system.
Wow.
And the second thing I like to say is that earlier I mentioned that kids, they absorb more of what they see as opposed to more than what we tell them. So when we have these kids, young kids, who are placed in a setting where they're with other offenders, they're going to learn a culture and a code very much unlike what the goal of them being rehabilitated was.
Wow.
They're going to learn behaviors that we wish they had not been exposed to. So then it creates a society, a mini society, where I'm trying to find, how can I be industrious, right? That's one of the psychological stages. How can I be industrious? Well, I can be industrious by what my peers are telling me that I need to do to become industrious, right? Whether it's by fighting, by stealing, by getting over, or, how do I identify myself? How do I appreciate that? And at that stage, we get that a lot from our peers.
Wow.
Now my peer group has been supplanted and now changed with people who are unfortunately also offending. So it does change the trajectory of what we're going to do, and it does lend itself to then reoffending.
It goes back to what you said, the whole labeling piece.
Yes.
If throughout your elementary years in school, through your middle school, through your high school, you've gotten in trouble and this label was stuck on you, then it's almost some sense of that's the expectation of me.
Right.
That the behavior that I show forth will be one that will be recalcitrant in nature, and that I simply will be the disruptors in the class, because after all, that's me and that's the expectation.
Right.
The way I should be. So going on to adulthood, and we'll to our listeners, viewers, we're going to go a few minutes over, but going into adulthood, Dr. Mons, how can I, as an adult, or what do you suggest or recommend if, number one, I'm a person that realizes even tonight that some of the things that are identifiers of people who were challenged, kids who are now adults, what's one of the things, what's ways that I can deal with that? And if I have recognized people who are obviously adults now that have all the identifiers of children, of being a child who was once challenged or a problem child, how can I relate to those people? What are some strategies I can do to a person who's today as an adult defiant, who is has food-related issues, who exhibits disrespectful behavior, who's impulsive or aggression?
Well, I think that if we're the person who's, the friend or the family member of that person, I think one, giving unconditional love and support.
Okay.
That's the first thing, because we have to be able to establish a dynamic of safety.
Yeah.
I'm safe with you, you're safe with me. If I can be safe with you and you're safe with me, then we can have candid conversations, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
About, what you observe and how this dynamic, makes me feel. So that's the first thing, and the second thing is, being able to usher those folks to other places where they can be safe. So the other place, hopefully, that we can be safe, of course, is the church, supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
So they can be around people who support and who love them, and they can learn some word that help them understand where their behaviors are and what the word expects. But also another place that's supposed to be safe with them for them is a place where they may be able to get some coaching or counseling. And I say this, I've said this a few times as far as people, seeking help. But when my brakes are out on my car, I can try to fondle with the brakes myself and try to get it fixed, right? But I'm not going to do a good job with that. I need to go to somebody who knows what's going on with my brakes to get help. And the same thing with our emotions and with our mind. For us to be able to go to someone and start to walk through some of the challenges that we have doesn't say anything less about us. If anything, it says, well, goodness, now I can see the potential that's there in front of me.
Yes.
Now I can work through these barriers. I can work through my preconceived notions of who I am, relationships, authority, how I engage with others. I can work through that. So now I've increased my potential.
Yes.
So,
yeah, and I think it's critical because, again, having had an experience of working in a school setting, as a guest teacher, in particular, I'm left with notes from the teacher, and some of the notes says, "Well, this kid is going to have problems, so don't let this kid go to the bathroom. Make sure this kid doesn't volunteer to do this." And the kids don't know it, but I'm looking at these notes and I say, "Oh my goodness, these kids, you've been labeled as a problem student. You've been labeled as being disruptive." And so, look, thankfully for me, I take that and weigh that with a grain of salt and allow myself to formulate my own opinions, because my classroom management style is generally different when I come in, because it's the law and that's what it's going to be. And so, but it's interesting how that goes with you as an adult. But perhaps someone, Dr. Moss, who's an adult now and sees that they've had these issues or these identifiers going on and it had manifested themselves, but then they weren't recognized or dealt with as a child. They're now adults, or maybe they have a child who is displaying these identifiers. Where can they go if they don't have adequate insurance? Someone asked, one of our viewers asked, sliding fee scales. Where can they go to get help if they really believe their child and definitely needs help to deal with some of these issues?
The best place to start for any of these counties is their mental health board.
Okay.
The mental health board for Hamilton County, for Butler County, where I am, they have access to all the resources. They know where the providers are, and they can get folks tucked in to have an evaluation and to perhaps then go on to get care. That would be the first thing, particularly if you don't have insurance. I would definitely start with the mental health board. Now, what we're finding perhaps over the past 15 years, and you may be aware of this already, is that a lot of local schools now have counselors within the school. So a mental health agency may actually have a child counselor already with an office within that kid's school. So being able to request a referral to that counselor would also be a healthy start for the child. For the adult who's having these challenges, and They've had this awakening to, hey, the way I've looked at the world, the way I've looked at myself, and my behaviors haven't been healthy. Again, going to the mental health board and asking, where are these providers, so that you can have an assessment would be great. And the assessment is not necessarily to diagnose a condition, though a condition might be there. But the assessment can also say, you know what, these are your strengths. These are the things that you've got down that you're doing well in, but these are also your challenges. And we're going to work on a plan together and set some goals where we can start to tackle some of these challenges, regardless of what domains they may be in. Pastor, if I wanted to say something else too,
Yeah.
we haven't addressed before we get off the air, and we've talked about it in a little bit in the past and past cast, but that's the issue of trauma.
Yes.
Trauma in children can manifest itself in so many ways. It can manifest itself as looking like an eating disorder. It can manifest itself with a great deal of aggression, agitation, impulsivity, difficulty with sleep, depression, being withdrawn, promiscuity. All of those things could be signs and symptoms of trauma. So as we think about all these behaviors of the challenging child, male or female, we want to make sure that we've had some way to explore whether there has been some trauma that has occurred with that child.
That is an excellent point. On the previous show, I talked about the church understanding that truth and challenge for more churches to become trauma informed, that they are aware that in our application of the word, that we do it with compassion. And one of the things, you mentioned promiscuity, one of the things that has long been a challenge for the church is how they have dealt with children who seem to be problematic and being promiscuous, not knowing that they have been victims of abuse. And what happens is one of the, this, that when a child has been abused, one of the signs is promiscuity, suicide, fascination with fire, bedwetting, and so forth and so on. One of the things that happens is that they'll get pregnant because as a result of being promiscuous. And the church will say, you've got to come before us.
Yeah.
You've got to apologize for your problematic behavior, not realizing that their behavior, to your point, is caused by a trauma. And now what's happening is they are being traumatized again.
That's right.
Victimized again.
Yeah.
They're in a situation, not a fault of their own, but having to apologize something, which really is a result of something or way in which they were violated. And
the terrible thing about that, not only are they re-traumatized, but when we think about that person and how they develop and how they think about their spiritual lives, unfortunately, it is God who often takes the rap for that.
Yeah. When in doubt, blame God.
Yeah. When we impose this on the child, as far as bringing them up before the church and embarrassing them and re-traumatizing them, when that person looks back, they think a little bit about the church, but they actually perceive that's the way perhaps God sees me. And I hate to be that type of proxy for God. We want to be the proxy of God's love, mercy, and grace, and all of that. Not something that's false, that brings shame and guilt, because our God and the Son is not about that. So
you're preaching now, Doctor. You're preaching now. You don't want you Dr. Moss, but you're preaching now. I couldn't agree with you more, my brother. Absolutely. And so in closing, I'm an adult now. Besides counseling, how can I change a narrative about myself as being problematic, being a challenging person?
We're gonna end with this, and I'll take folks back to the Word as well.
Yes.
We talked about counseling, And we talked about at the beginning of the show about how do I define myself, right? You know,
Yeah.
how I've been labeled. But we can put those labels behind us if
Yeah.
we were to dig in and see what the letters say about us.
Amen.
Regardless of what our behaviors have been, regardless of what our struggles are right now, what the word says is that, you know, we are indeed his loving child, his royal
Yeah.
priesthood, his
Yeah.
peculiar people. I mean,
Yeah.
he says those great things about us.
Yeah.
So then if God believes that about me,
Yeah.
I need to search more about this God so I can find out more about who I am, if
Yeah.
that makes any sense, you know?
So in changing the narrative, we've got to get the help that we can get, but we also have to know who we are and whose we are
That's right.
and how God views us. God does not view us as damaged property,
Mm-mm.
but he views us as the apple of his eye.
That's right.
Hallelujah. Thanks again. It has been an absolute joy tonight. And I know and I believe that those who have joined us were helped, blessed, and encouraged. So thank you once again for availing yourself. And we salute you, especially Dr. Moss, in your work that you do, because truly you are, uh, to find someone who is a psychiatrist practicing with multiple offices, African American male, is, I'd have to do some research, but I think I may be able to count on a few hands, but not a whole lot. But thank you so much for your passion. Um, and I feel your calling uh, to help people be well.
Well, thanks for having me here, and to God be the glory, man. Thank you.
To our viewers, stay with us and be with us next week as we will return with Dr. Harley, and we will be dealing with breakdowns, looking at nervous breakdowns and what does that entail. Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye-bye.